So we've seen a myriad of federal programs introduced the past few months to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. Amongst them is the Canada Emergency Business Account, or CEBA. It offers $40,000 loans, $10,000 of which is forgivable under certain conditions. But do some organizations maybe fall through the cracks in these efforts to keep the economy going? With us today, it's Mike Schilling. He's CEO of Community Savings Credit Union. Mike, I want to thank you for joining us on the program.
Great to be here. Thanks very much.
So, obviously you guys are responding to this, and we can go into that in just a moment. But what was your initial reaction to CEBA when government introduced that a couple of weeks ago?
Well, I think it was a move in the right direction, and actually some sort of government-backed business loan. Community Savings had been calling for that for some time. We saw what was going on the ground. We saw that a lot of our business customers, our business members, needed a bridging loan, some sort of short-term liquidity. We as a credit union, like lots of banks, were in a position, we had the money to lend, but actually it was a very difficult lending environment because lots of businesses didn't have a secure future, and it's very difficult for the financial services industry to do anything there. So very much welcomed. It's something we were lobbying for. Could there be more money there? Could there be looser restrictions? I think, we'd always like to see more. We'd always like to be able to help more of our members. But I think definitely a move in the right direction.
Well, the other thing that we have been monitoring, from a national level, though, is Bank of Canada. They've been cutting overnight rate as well. Has that been kind of the correct response in your opinion? Have they been doing enough at this point?
Well, doing enough is always going to be. I think the people who are left out, or the people who are just on the edge, are going to say no. But certainly, I think that's helped. And really, what we absolutely needed to see was a range of fiscal and monetary measures. I think we needed to throw the whole kitchen sink at this, as well as things like the wage subsidy, which has been provided. And again, it's something which we were looking at very closely. We look at the support that workers are getting very closely. It's absolutely critical to our business model. And when the government announced the 10% wage subsidy, we knew that was far too low, really, to seriously help any businesses and help keep people on the payroll. The 75% thing was obviously a significant swing, and I would say actually that as a support model announced federally was the thing which changed our modelling quite significantly. It changed our.
Why was that?
Well, I just think I believe in sort of the basics. If we can keep people on the payroll, if we can keep people in work and not break that employer-employee relationship, that means that the recovery is that much easier. We don't have people drifting away from the office, from their employer. We don't have the very human things like the bad blood that creates. And I think we were very much looking beyond COVID and how do we fight back through this. And I think that was that 75% wage subsidy was a big help for that. Obviously, with some people, it doesn't go far enough. That's always going to be the case, but I think it was a big step.
Well, if we're talking about employees and employers, maybe let's get into what you guys are doing to fill in some of those gaps that might exist with certain organizations, specifically with unions and their ability to access some income, or I should say some capital, in order to keep the doors open. Tell me a little bit about what you guys are doing as an initiative here.
Well, one of the things that we spotted, and a bit of background here, Community Savings, we're the largest provider of banking services to labour unions in BC. So that's our thing. It's something we know a lot about. We have very, very close relationships with labour unions who support over 500,000 workers here. So one of the things that we noticed with the CEBA loan was that actually a lot of the private sector businesses, a lot of our small business owners weren't eligible. There have been some changes on that announced last week, which is great. But one of the groups that was specifically excluded and continues to be specifically excluded were labour unions. And as I said, that makes up a big base of our membership. And we didn't think that was right because we see what over the last 2 months labour unions have been doing in terms of helping workers be safe at work. I think we all feel the responsibility and the importance of that workers are safe at work, but also those whose jobs are at risk have got the right advice and right support that they can weather that storm without spiraling into a financial crisis of their own. So the people that I know and speak to every day within the labour movement are working terrifically hard right now to try to support workers right across our economy. And I think, again, looking at the fight back that we want to see post-COVID, we need those workers to be in the strongest position as they can be. So we just didn't think it was right that labour unions right now, who are suffering their own, some of whom actually, all of the labour unions across BC, they're all impacted differently, but some of them are suffering financially themselves, and it's very difficult to be able to help other people when you can't help yourself. So that's where Community Savings has stepped in, and we're actually going to provide a loan which is exactly mirroring the federal government programme. We're going to provide that loan ourselves to labour unions and make sure that they can benefit from that programme too.
If I had to do some wild supposition, I would guess that maybe labour unions involving nurses probably doing okay right now, but maybe those involved with, say, I don't know, live events or catering. We have that in, say, downtown Vancouver, for example. That industry has kind of been wiped out for the time being. Is that where you're seeing kind of a lot of the pressure being applied for these organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. But, we've seen it definitely in those sort of private sector jobs within the hospitality or entertainment industry. I think we all feel that. And those unions really struggling. Unite Here Local 40, the president of that union came out, who looks after a lot of the hotel workers in downtown Vancouver, for instance, amongst others. Really great messages really great, strong messages coming out of there. But also, those guys are feeling the pressure. But actually, we've seen it in some of the public sector unions in pockets there. And we're seeing it across the board. So really our job is to make sure that what those unions are not worried about right now is paying their own bills. What they're worried about is supporting workers in BC, which in turn supports the businesses and the recovery that we want to see.
And I think about maybe broadly about CEBA as well, with a lot of the small businesses looking to access money. How do you think we are stacking up right now in terms of small businesses having enough working capital right at the point where we're getting into phase 2 of reopening the economy? Where's BC in the small businesses? How are we performing at this point?
Well, I think this is. I think you talked about phase 2, right? And this has got to be a phased approach. The federal government and I think provincial level too have been rolling out schemes that none of us have ever thought of before. We didn't think we were going to need. No one expected to be here, and I think that's great. But we need to keep looking at this, and we as an organisation, Community Savings, are monitoring this on a daily basis. What do we need today? It was different to what we needed yesterday, and we need to be able to react and to be flexible. And that works whether we're a business, whether we're a government, whoever we are. And I think we need to see more. One of the things that we were lobbying for in terms of government-supported lending, I think we could go further in terms of the dollars. I think they could introduce a scheme where the banks and the credit unions have skin in the game too. What that ensures is that we have really strong lending decisions being made, because now I have skin in the game, and I'm going to make that strong lending decision, and that's what actually we're good at as a credit union, as a bank. But we do need that government support to make sure that we all act in the same way across financial services. So I would like to see the dollar amounts increase. I would like to see that lenders have skin in the game. I think I'm willing to take on that responsibility. And I think then we work with the best businesses, with the best plans, who are really going to help us fight out of this. And I think that's the economy working hopefully a little bit more normally in the way that it should do.
Well, maybe you can give me some thoughts overall. I don't suppose it necessarily applies to what you guys do, but the LEAF program with regards to the focus on large employers. And those are for companies the government has described as lender of last resort, and for maybe financial institutions that would look at the situation of a company that has more than $300 million in annual revenue. And they're like, well, we don't know if we necessarily want to be pumping up kind of their coffers at this point. Is that still kind of the right tack for the government to take? Say, hey, if there's no other financial institution that'll take this on, the government's willing to step up to ensure that, all these workers that you have will continue to be employed if you guys have to figure things out in the meantime?
I'm torn actually on this one, because no one is enjoying what we're seeing right now at any level of our society, personally, business, across the world. So I'm torn because no one wants to see a failure due to such, may I call it a natural disaster such as this. But there is a principle in business, and those of us, who work in this area, there is a survival of the fittest. There's an efficiency of the economy, which means that the best businesses survive, they attract the capital, and they thrive. And I think what I'm hearing from federal governments, and you see this across the world really, is that they do want to apply some of those principles, that a business which wasn't performing well, which hadn't built in the resiliency that perhaps it should have, should we be propping them up? Is that the right thing to do with public money? Is it the right thing to do in terms of driving the efficiency of the future economy? So I think these things need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. That being said, I think where we're going to see catastrophic job losses due to some of these problems, I think the government does need to step in, because actually then, standing on that principle actually causes a bigger problem on top of a bigger problem. But there would need to be consequences down the line, I think, for these large employers who hadn't built in that resiliency that strong businesses have, and we've seen that across the board.
So obviously, as a financial institution, you need to be thinking about what is coming next. I don't think anyone thinks that the numbers for the second quarter with regards to jobs, economic growth, they're not going to be great. But if we're looking towards the third quarter, the fourth quarter, how do you think Canada, maybe BC, is positioned to bounce back from what is kind of the greatest economic catastrophe that we've experienced since probably the Great Depression?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's a couple of things here. I think looking at BC, and I'm a newcomer to BC. I came here because it's such a great place. And I think I've been proved right, actually, because when we look at this from a medical point of view, there's absolutely no denying that on the international stage, BC has outperformed pretty much anyone else on the international stage in terms of the way that we've dealt with this medically. And I think we should take some pride in that. And I think the people here, the workers here, the businesses here, we should have some confidence on top of that about what we can achieve here on the west coast of Canada. And for me, I think in terms of the fight back, I'm a natural optimist, and I like to give things a go. And I think in terms of that fight back, we should be looking not to rebuild our economy as it was, not to kind of claw back, but let's build something better. Let's have a think about the resilience that we've seen in the economy. And I keep saying this word resilience, and I think that is absolutely going to be the key factor that we look at in terms of the recovery. I think we could do an amazing thing here in BC, and I think Canada as a whole could lead in that way too, in building a more resilient economy, daring to sort of think beyond what we thought of before. We've all just had to do that over the last 2 months. We've all had to do things that we didn't imagine that we could, that we thought were going to be harder, but we actually achieved them. And I think when we're looking for this economic recovery, that's what we should be thinking. We should think with real ambition. We should be proud of what we've achieved so far. We should build an economy which has more resilient businesses, a more resilient workforce, more resilient supply chains, and for me, a more resilient financial services sector. And that's what we're trying to prove in our business model at Community Savings, and it's what we're trying to sort of demonstrate on the other side of this.
So I think we can both agree that the economy is positioned to be restacked in a way that would allow, dramatic changes to be enacted. I hear from the Prime Minister this week of talking about mandating that everybody gets 10 days paid sick leave, for example. That's something that would not exist prior to the pandemic. With all that in mind, how do you think BC will actually do that? Do you think that, even though we might want to do that, I don't know, what does your gut tell you about whether or not that will actually come to fruition?
Well, not only my gut, but at Community Savings, I'm going to give ourselves a little bit of a pat on the back here. Our employees have 12 days sick entitlement every year, and we bank further on that. What we actually did at the start of COVID, recognizing that we had a sort of civic duty here, was to say, if any of our team needed to take sick due to COVID, if it's specific advice, we will cover that without them having to take their sick entitlement. We'll just cover it. It was the right thing to do, and we shouldn't see any pressure. None of us here would like to see people going into work if they're sick. That doesn't help any of us. And so we demonstrate every day that an employer can give those sort of benefits and that sort of support to its team and still be one of the top performing credit unions in BC. So we do that every day. So it's more than my gut. It's absolutely the way that we live our life every day. And I see lots of other organizations that I talk to who treat their teams in that way. Now, that system has not been abused. None of my team have abused that system. We've not got everyone on leave, taking 2 weeks off. What we've got is people working terrifically hard, proud of where they work, proud of what we're achieving, and really delivering it. And as I said, I'm an optimist. I believe in people, and I think it's absolutely realistic that employers, decent employers, resilient employers, can provide that sort of support to their workers, and it will be paid back. It'll be paid back because they will have the strongest team. They will have a team that's dedicated, that's very efficient. That's the productivity is there. And I think it's absolutely something we should be looking at for. And I know provincially, the government here in BC are calling for that very strongly at a national level, and may go out of step and provide it themselves. I think supporting workers right now is absolutely the right thing for businesses to do, and it says something about who we are.
Yeah, and I definitely get the sense talking to a lot of people across the economy that there's just going to be this new emphasis on the importance of retaining workers. And I think we're seeing that through the programs the federal government is introducing. But Mike, it was great talking to you, and I just want to thank you for joining us on the show today.
Hey, no problem. Anytime.
That's Mike Schilling. He's CEO of Community Savings Credit Union. And that's it for the show today, but we'll be back soon enough. In the meantime, go to BIV.com for all the latest news and more videos as well.